Let's bring in Matthew Whitaker, former acting attorney general under Donald J. Trump. Matthew, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Okay, so this all stems from the fact that after he left the White House, he took 15 cartons of stuff down to Mar-a-Lago, finally returned it. National Archives said stuff is missing or they were worried about it. And so that is presumably what this is all about. It has nothing to do with January 6th. It's more about January 20th. So the question of classification of national secrets and stuff like that is kind of complicated because the president can declassify anything he wants when he's president. And it is unclear whether or not, if they find anything at Mar-a-Lago, whether or not he declassified it before he left office and it was simply not updated with the markings.
Yeah, Steve, and this is a dramatic escalation for something that really could have been handled much differently. You know, they could have sent a subpoena for these documents that they believe exist at Mar-a-Lago. I just think that sending 30 FBI agents seems to be a really misallocation of resources when you have you know, our nation's cities experiencing violent crime, and when you have you know, a crunch just generally across federal law enforcement to try to handle all of the issues that we have. But, you know, I think the other thing that a lot of people are concerned about, including myself, is the continued two-tiered system of justice where people like Hunter Biden, Hillary Clinton, and others, you know, get away, it appears, with, you know, with nothing for consequences for their activities. But Donald Trump seems to be continually investigated, whether it's Russian collusion hoax, the two impeachments, January 6th committee, you know, the investigation that's coming out of that from the FBI, and now this investigation.
Now, the AG and the FBI director, they had to have signed off on this, and I know that you're the former acting attorney general under Donald Trump. What do you know about that? Would they have had to say, yes, you can go and do this, go and search his house rather than do the subpoena?
Well, there's two different things that could have happened. They could have, you know, had this working as part of the investigation and gone to them late and said, this is going to happen tomorrow. That's, you know, what happened in the case when I was acting attorney general of Roger Stone. You know, was given late notice, wasn't told about the specifics of the tactics or techniques that were going to be used. But, you know, in this case, I'm guessing that both Chris Wray and Merrick Garland were intimately involved in not only approving this case being, you know, progressing as it did, but also approving the execution of a search warrant instead of other means to obtain the same information. And I just think it looks to me like a very much an intentional shot across the bow to try to, you know, sort of make Donald Trump look like he's under investigation for something more serious than this actually is. Because Steve was mentioning earlier, Ainsley, that the Presidential Records Act is not as clear-cut as maybe some people on the left would like to suggest. You know, the records that they were looking at, you know, are things like you know, a letter from Kim Jong-un I read, or, you know, other types of artifacts from his presidency. And this could have easily been negotiated or otherwise requested by a subpoena.
Mm-hmm. So, Matt, this goes to the question of why. In the political aspects of the FBI, we know you had early on Michael Sussman going over to the FBI as just to help them out. We know the inner workings with McCabe and Lisa Strzok and Page going back and forth with there. We just had the FBI director testify before Congress and says that, you know, he's concerned with some of the revelations with the Hunter Biden probe, as well as having one of his agents maybe being convoluted within that. Now you have McCarthy, the minority leader, saying this. He said, I've seen enough. The Department of Justice have reached an intolerable state of weaponized politicization. When Republicans take back the House, we will conduct immediate oversight of this department, follow the facts, and leave no stone unturned. Attorney General Garland, preserve your documents and clear your calendar. So the big question is this. What can the Republicans do when they get power back? You've been in office before. They're scheduled to win the House. We know that the presidency will still be Joe Biden's. What can they do there?
Well, it's a good point, and don't forget, Lawrence, that there's at least a dozen whistleblowers that have come to Chuck Grassley and Jim Jordan and pointed out the politicization of the FBI and how they were putting their thumb on the scale, for example, of the Hunter Biden investigation, suggesting that it was Russian disinformation that was the laptop and not, Hunter Biden's records recording his illegal activities. But that being said, I was the first person in the Trump administration after the Democrats retook the House to go up to an oversight hearing. And if you remember, Lawrence, what that was like, it was an absolute zoo. I expect the Republicans, like McCarthy and especially Jim Jordan, who's probably going to be the Judiciary Committee chair, to run a very organized and thorough oversight hearing of all of these people, whether it's Director Wray, Merrick Garland, the Deputy Attorney General, whomever needs to come up there and answer these questions as to how does this happen, why did it happen, and to demand answers and to not be satisfied until they get
But
the
Matt,
answers.
I guess the big question is the Republicans had control for 2 years. They knew what was happening at the FBI. We knew about the FISA court, yet pretty much all the Republicans voted to give the FISA court back their authority again after we know that they lied to a federal judge. Even that judge asked questions about that. Why should Republicans be trusted now to do something about it when they had control? They did nothing about the FISA court. They did nothing about the FBI. They did nothing about the Department of Justice.
Yeah, well, there was, the 2 years went by very quickly in 17 and 18, and oversight was distracted, to say the least. And I'm sure that those that were there would suggest that they didn't have the appropriate people that could do this type of work, although I think John Ratcliffe and others were fairly effective. But you're right. I think there are some improvements. Now, on the FISA court, I think that is an important tool, necessary, but the FBI's abuses did call into question whether they could appropriately run it, because there is, remember, in a FISA court, there's no opposing side, kind of like the January 6th committee, and we see how what a disaster that is right now.
So the Republicans are going to run on this, talk about the raid. Trump's political team sent out fundraising solicitations about the search late last night. Meanwhile, Matthew, as you know, it's not the FBI just saying, hey, let's all get a bunch of squad cars and go over to Mar-a-Lago and see what we can find in the safe. The DOJ, in concert with the FBI, had to present evidence at a probable cause hearing with a judge, and the judge had to look at the stuff. So for it to be at this historic level, I mean, no, there's never been a raid at the home of a former president ever. So the FBI and the DOJ must have known exactly what they were looking for. And you wonder whether or not somebody from perhaps Trump's inner circle or somebody else flipped and now is cooperating with federal law enforcement and said, okay, you need to go here and look for this because I saw it with my own 2 eyes, or something like that.
Yeah, Steve, while we don't know exactly what the FBI was looking for, all indications and stories coming out of this is it's just presidential records that were covered under the Presidential Records Act, or a mishandling of confidential information. It just seems to me, as I know how these cases work, that this was a very grave situation and a very heavy-handed tactics that could have otherwise been handled less publicly and more discreetly to get these documents that allegedly work. And you're right, a affidavit would have been sworn out, would have alleged, that crimes had been committed and that there was evidence at Mar-a-Lago that would support, proving those crimes. I think this is we have crossed a line that I'm not sure the Republic is going to appreciate long term, and the American people are going to need answers to a lot of these questions.
Well, here's what America is thinking. The dossier debunked. You have Eric Trump last night on with Sean talking about how every day their family basically received a subpoena. Then you have the January 6th committee that is one-sided and unfair, and no cross-examination is allowed. And now you have this raid for taking possibly archives away from the White House. Those are 4 different things that they've gone after Trump and his family for. But then you look at the flip side of, you've got Hunter Biden with this laptop. You've got Hillary Clinton that whitewashes, that gets rid of classified classified information, and nothing happens to them. And it appears that Democrats are trying to find a way to get Trump not to run again. At least that's what many Americans think. When is enough enough? When do they stop doing this and they just let people go to the polls and vote?
Well, I mean, we have an election coming up, but this is just a continuation on the deep state's war against Donald Trump, and he's going to continue to fight back, against it. And I think a lot of patriots are going to join him in that regard.
All right, Matthew Whitaker joining us from near a bridge, it looks like. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us live.
Thank you.